Irreverent, entertaining, cool. You're listening to LA Talk
Radio. You're listening to Remotely Unique with Mary Baca, only on LA Talk Radio.
This is Mary Baca, and today we're airing from Albuquerque, New Mexico. I'm going to be talking with you, and I have some guest speakers today who are wives of police officer and firefighters. So I want to welcome my guests today. And just say a little bit about myself for those of you who are tuning into the program today for the first time. Again, my name is Mary Baca, and I am a licensed therapist who practice therapy in the state of New Mexico. I also am a holistic practitioner. So I'm an applied kinesiologist, Reiki practitioner, and recently received my certification in hypnotherapy. I've been in my field of service for over 30 years. I have 2 businesses, and I have also taught classes in the field of psychology and criminology in local colleges, as well as providing seminars and workshops, not only here locally, but even elsewhere via Skype and things like that. Most of the services that I provide can also be delivered through Skype and technology, hence the name Remotely Unique. Up until about 10 years ago, I worked for private companies or different companies in addition to doing my private practice. So I've actually conducted child abuse investigations for the state of New Mexico. I've, for many years, was the full-time employee assistance counselor for the United States Postal Service. I've been director in a couple of treatment facilities, including teen mothers and their children. My specialty areas are in trauma, depression, anxiety, workplace and organizational dynamics, post-traumatic stress disorder, and sexual abuse. And so in the last 15 to 18 years, I have worked with police officers and firefighters, and in that arena, it's allowed me to also work with their wives and significant others, wives, husbands, and children. And one of the areas, I feel like there's a lot of attention that's brought to the first responder themselves. As you've heard me, for the 3 prior shows to today, I've had guest speakers on and have highlighted that area, but I really wanted to bring some wives in today to talk about their experiences as spouses of first responders. And I definitely think that they deserve, much great gratitude and appreciation for being the major support system for their husbands and wives. Today we just have wives on board. A lot of times with police officers and firefighters, people think that they're kind of like robots, and forget that they're human beings who have families and who want to go home at the end of the day to their families. And I think that's overlooked a lot. And, sometimes there's a lot of negativity brought to police officers in terms of how police officers are viewed and that kind of thing. So, today I want it to be positive, and in fact, I'm working on having a first responder family appreciation day on July 30th here in Albuquerque that will actually highlight spouses, first responders, and children. So I'd like to welcome, and I'm just going to use first names today so that anonymity can be preserved. That way these ladies can feel comfortable sharing whatever they want to share, and so can their husbands. So I want to welcome Carla first. Thank you, Carla, for joining us.
Thank you for asking me to be on the show, Mary.
And I want to welcome Sarah. Thank you, Sarah, for coming today to share some of your insights and information.
Thank you so much for having me on your show.
And then Deneen, I want to also welcome you for coming and being willing to share with anybody who's listening and hereafter, because these shows are going to be archived. You can get the shows after on iTunes, actually, if you go to the podcast section. So I appreciate you, Deneen, coming on and being willing to share your insights and information.
Well, thank you, Mary.
So one of the first questions, and bear in mind, I just have some questions that I had sent all of you, but you really can share, feel free to share anything that you feel would be helpful to our listeners and, sometimes wives that are just new into this. But what have you found to be some challenges of being the wife of a firefighter or police officer? And anybody can go. Who wants to start?
Well,
I'll go ahead.
Sarah, go ahead.
Oh, well, I just wanted to share one of the big challenges of being a police wife would be constant shift changes and having to just be okay with it and adapt as a family. We have childcare issues, balancing family life. The holidays are always rough. But for the most part, challenge is just to accept what they have to accept and move forward and not dwell on it. Find a solution and, just try to work it out as a family.
Right. I know one of the things I've noticed about spouses is a lot of the times it's like being a single parent.
Exactly. I agree with that.
Yeah.
Very much so.
I know with myself, my husband's a firefighter, and he's on shift work, and he's gone 24 hours at a time. So you have to adjust to being at home by yourself at night a lot. And I do agree. You feel like you're a single parent raising your children with help from your husband or spouse, here and there.
Right. I always think about it. I don't know why I get like this visual, but when they come home, it's kind of like, them jumping on a merry-go-round that's already in motion, and everybody kind of having to adjust that, okay, they're back in the house, and them having to adjust and just kind of catch things that are in motion. And that must be really, really tough.
Yes, I know with myself, as soon as he would come home, you had to leave him alone. He had to have a couple of hours to kind of decompress, and any noise really bothered him. So it was almost like we had to play quiet for a couple of hours every time he would come home, from his shift work. So that's a challenge.
And was he able to ask for that, or did you just kind of, get used to giving that?
Well, he blew up. He blew up every time there was a noise. So after 4 or 5 of those, you realize, it was a lot of times we would leave and go run errands and try to do things that would leave him alone for a while.
Right. Yeah. One of the things, I think that there is a higher rate of, just anger and short-temperedness and moodiness with police and firefighters and EMS workers, I think, because just kind of changing gears.
Well, and not only that, they come from a very high-stress, high-adrenaline job for 10, 12 hours a day, and then they come home and, like she said, decompress, but part of that is just, letting down their guard of, having to look over their shoulder, having to, pay attention to everything around them, be so on high alert for 10, 12 hours a day, to come home and just relax. So, I'm sure it's a long process for them as well. And, just to be understanding of that.
Yes, and I think that's true. I think that just kind of switching gears from, having, just think about what that does physiologically to the body, just to have to be on high alert, like you said. And we don't live in a society, like we used to, right? So there's high alert in places that there didn't used to be, so schools and malls and churches even, so yeah, that's very, very true. I think, too, going into what affects a person or how much they'll be affected by their job is, I think, of who they are and what issues they have or behavior patterns and things going into the job. Their type of personality, their coping mechanisms that they already have, whether or not they've had trauma already prior to going into this line of work, I think also factor into all of that. So that can either make it easier or more difficult. What about...
Yeah, I can...
Go ahead.
Oh, go ahead. Go ahead.
No, you can add what you were going to add to that. Sarah?
Oh, coming from my husband's point of view, he does have a very high stress job, but he does come from a very great family, and I think they raised him and his three brothers, who are also police officers here in Albuquerque, very, very well. And it just, I guess, depends on how, like you said, Mary, where they come from, any stress that they've had. He handles the job very well. He doesn't bring it home with him. We've always had that policy. He's been an officer for 9 years. And, before he comes through the front door, he leaves his work at work. And home life is home life. And we've always made that distinction. If he does need to decompress, I'm always here for him, but I don't hound him. And it's actually really worked for us and for him as well. And I just think that, his upbringing has helped with how he deals with the job as well.
Yeah. How would you say he deals with stress, like just in general? Because, I want to hear positive also, like what does he do you think?
Definitely. I think that, he has a hobby that he does by himself, and he kind of takes the time, and he always feels like, well, I have to help you with the kids when he comes home, and he wants to help me because he knows that I've been handling everything. But just by me telling him, go do your hobby, go do your thing, because you need some time for yourself to decompress. And he doesn't have mood swings. He's not overwhelmed, but I believe, and I've always felt this way, that he was born to be a police officer. Some people just are meant to be where they're supposed to be, and that's him. He handles it very, very well.
That's true. I think you definitely have to love any of these lines of work, or you just don't last. What
definitely. I couldn't do it.
Yeah, I couldn't either. I myself could not. I make a good therapist, but I could not be a police officer or a firefighter for sure. What about you, Carla? What have you found to be some challenges?
Well, my husband's now retired. He's been retired almost 5 years from the fire department, but I can echo what the other ladies are saying, which is, you just learn to adapt. I can remember two instances that stick out in my mind. One was moving day. We were planning to move. Everything was set, ready to go, and he was forced in. And so I just had to deal with it. I had to move the whole household without him. And another time was for Christmas Eve. We had the whole family planning to come over for Christmas Eve, and he was forced in. So those are definitely challenges. The other thing was, they were on a 24-48 schedule, so we never had a full weekend together ever, unless, of course, he had pre-planned his time off, and that was always dependent on where he stood in the seniority and how they got their shift bid. So, we would have to plan vacation a year in advance. So that we knew what time he had off. So we could never be spontaneous about taking time off unless he was able to get lucky and do shift trades. And I think that's very difficult sometimes for them because they do get burnt out, and they just cannot be spontaneous about taking that time off. So I think those are definitely challenges, and likewise with what the others have said, you learn to just become a single parent in some respects, and you learn to just go to family functions and other things without them. It's just part of the lifestyle.
So you have a unique perspective in that your husband's been retired. So I have a question for you. So does that all end with retirement, that, that difficulty being spontaneous? Because I would think, like, through 20 years, that just all this stuff gets so ingrained that, how spontaneous is he able to be, and how even available, not out of not wanting to, but just like, you've carried the bulk of things, for many years.
Right. No, actually, I think he was ready. He was ready to be spontaneous, and he's been great about it. The flip side, which is kind of funny, is you get used to them being gone every third day overnight. And so when he first retired, I had to adjust to him being home every night. So on one hand, I was always bummed he was gone on a weekend or night. Now, be careful what you ask for because now he is home every night and weekend. So at times it was a good time for me to bond with my daughter when he was gone, or just have some downtime, and that definitely changed when he retired.
Yeah, so that's an adjustment in itself for sure, to kind of undo some of that. You kind of getting conditioned to just be like that, be alone, make plans on your own, and then there is an adjustment, I'm sure, once that person does retire.
Absolutely.
How do you think your husband's profession has impacted your children in both positive and negative ways?
Well, this is Carla. So my daughter was 3 years old when my husband retired from the fire service. So she has some understanding of him being a firefighter, and she'll talk about it, but she didn't, really know that lifestyle. But I definitely think she's more aware of things than other kids, because he talks about certain things, or he's aware of situations, and so I think it does impact her. And to what one of the ladies said, I think sometimes my husband, he's very sensitive to noise as well, and so there's times where, depending on the mood he's in, he's fine with her being just an average kid, and there's other times where it frustrates him, and so learning to adapt to that as well.
And would you say it frustrates him a little bit more than what it would just a person who, attributing it to that, to his background, his career?
Yes, and he's aware of it too. He'll say, noise bothers me. I'm sensitive to noise. So he's aware of it, but it's times like that I take her to go do something else. You just learn to be aware of his limitations, I guess.
So all you ladies are very adaptable, to say the least.
You kind of have to be.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, and independent, I've never met a spouse that's not, really independent. I don't think you can be otherwise.
I don't think it would work out. I think that's one of the prime reasons why a lot of divorce, there's a high divorce rate within, public servants, is because some wives just aren't adaptable, and they're very needy, or very, not independent, can't do it on their own. So it just doesn't work, because like you said, you are required to be independent.
Right. I think that's true, that it just wouldn't work. So how has it impacted your children? How do they have to be adaptable as well?
Well, my children are, all they want to do is play cop, talk cop. They love police officers. They can spot lights and sirens from a mile away. My oldest is 7, and he wants to be a police officer, and then my youngest is 4, and he actually wants to be a firefighter. And I encourage that. I love it. I think that them starting so early, exposed to it, and wanting to be a public servant is a great way to teach them about giving back to the community and thinking of others first. I think it's a great thing. But then on the bad side, on the negative side, you have them, having a shift change, and my husband going to graveyard, and them wondering, where's Dad? How come he's not home? In their head, they think bad things happen at night. So everyone should be home. Little kids think that way. And it was an adjustment when my husband went to graveyard for my oldest to understand that Dad just had to change shifts, going to work while everyone else is asleep.
And that's really hard because during those times when your husbands are gone, they can't even just do something as simple that we probably really take for granted, like help with bedtime routine. Read a story or give a bath or.
Getting them ready in the morning. But then on the other side, as a wife, loving your husband, you just feel horrible for them. You feel bad for them that they have to do this because, you work from, 10 o'clock to 8 in the morning and then you have to do court. A cop's job is never over. You got to go to court for all the cases that you do. And, he could go to court at 9 o'clock in the morning and then at 1 o'clock in the afternoon and running on fumes all day long because it's just required of him. Right. So, as a wife, you just try to make it easy on him, but, inside you feel bad for them.
Right. And there's nothing anybody can do about it. I mean, it's just the nature of the job, so.
It is the nature of the job, and they don't get enough credit for what they do and what they're required to do.
Right. Well, I think a lot of people, and that's one of the reasons why I've done these segments, is because I don't want people to forget. So if I would have done one show, it'd be easy to say, oh yeah, okay, that was informative. But this is my fourth segment, because I don't want people to forget the different things we've covered, like PTSD and acute stress, and then leading up to talking to you wives, I think a lot of people are really naive when they think about what police officers and firefighters do, or EMS professionals as well. And then you get into the whole thing of, well, a volunteer firefighter or a police officer who's in the reserves, or, all of these things still go on. It doesn't really matter, One of the things I'm looking at is that the National Center for Women in Policing has said that 40% of police officer families experience domestic violence, whereas families not involved in police work make up 10% of domestic violence cases. That's pretty interesting. What do you guys think? What do you guys think about that? And even for firefighters, like just the tendency or the kind of the setup for there to be more anger because of the stress of the job.
Well, I can speak for myself, as my husband being a firefighter. He was pretty violent in our early marriage. And, I was not raised in a family that had police officers or firefighters. This was totally new to me, and we'd been married a little bit later in life, and neither one of us had kids prior. But very quickly, I became afraid when he would kind of blow up. And my kids, felt very estranged from him at times when he would get really angry. So I don't think my kids bonded as closely to him when they were younger. And it created like a fear for us, and not knowing what to do, it was very scary. It was kind of a scary marriage in the beginning. And you kind of work it out as it goes. You realize he needs more time for this. He needs to be outside. And so he did, and that does help. But I feel for new wives and spouses that are coming in, their husbands or wives just starting with the fire department or police department, because there's so much that you're going to learn, and it's so scary if you don't have a support, like a support system to talk, with someone about, is this normal? Does this happen? Why is he so angry? And now that he confides in me about things he saw, which he never did in the beginning, now I understand so much more than I did when we were first married.
Right. Because what did you think about that behavior when you were first married? Did you think, well, you don't have the missing pieces of information, right?
Yeah, well, I couldn't figure him out. And if I asked questions, he would get more angry. So the communication was not good. And it took many years to get that resolved, and it did take counseling. And counseling was the best thing. It was the very best thing for both he and I.
Well, and that's one of the reasons, I plan to, I've been trying to coordinate a time when everybody can meet, but I plan on starting a wives support group so that, I mean, people might not come in and talk about necessarily what their husbands are doing work-wise, but just kind of knowing that everybody in the group can relate to that in case you did have something you needed to talk about, I think will be great,
I agree.
Yeah. What about the others? Let's see. Did you all talk about how that's impacted your children?
So this is Carla. You know, thankfully, my husband, through the stress of it all, he never resorted to physical abuse. He never resorted to substance abuse. So that's not something that I've ever had to deal with. But the one thing, I think his way of coping, because let's face it, they all deal with very difficult things as first responders, and they're only human, that his sort of came out through anxiety. And so, for instance, he could never sit still, never could sit still. He could not just sit and relax or, on a weekend just lay in bed and enjoy, just being there. He always had to be up doing something. His mind always had to be focused on something constantly, whether it was cleaning the house or working on the yard there was just always a constant movement with him.
I'm glad that you mentioned that. That's anxiety a lot of times is part of one of the fallouts, of being in this line of work. So with him retiring, has that improved?
Yes and no. So it's improved in the sense of he recognized it, and he's getting help for it and takes medication. So he's definitely not as anxious, and sometimes we joke because the medication that he does take now makes him super chill, and so sometimes he doesn't get things done around the house as quickly as I like. But those are the pros and cons. I tell him, I'd rather him be happier and a better state of mind, and I'll deal with the fact that he's much more relaxed.
And I have a question for all of you. Were all of you married to your husbands when they got involved in this line of work?
Well, myself, this is Sarah. I was with my husband for about 5 years before we got married, and then 2 weeks after we were married, he started the academy.
Wow. Okay. And because I'm just curious, like if you saw from the beginning, kind of the, even professional development, but the transition, as they go through different things.
Yeah, with me in the police department, I noticed a little bit of a change from him. Right out of the academy, it was more that he noticed everything around him a lot more than the average person. If we're driving in the car, he'll just kind of, look into the next car that pulled up next to him, and he's driving in his personal vehicle. And, it almost looks like he's staring at the person, and I'm thinking, what are you doing? Like, they're going to think you're weird staring at him. But it's just, habit, because in his police car, he has to do that. But, with him, I don't think it was that much of a difference. We just kind of transitioned easy. The only thing was that we didn't really get a honeymoon phase. That's the only thing I missed out on.
Yeah, I mean, even the shifts, so force hire, Deneen, you mentioned that term, and then I know that police officers a lot of times, will get mandated to work overtime given certain situations, and so that's another thing I think that's stressful.
Well, my husband's part of the emergency response team, and he's also a field training officer, so we've got a lot of extra stuff, and with the emergency response team, they're on a kind of like a rotation, so he gets 1 week out of the month that he's primary, a second week he's secondary, and, for the Bosque fires, they were activated. If there's like a really intense scene that they need more bodies, they'll activate him. And it could be, we could be anywhere and that can happen. But he does have a hand in training officers, and I think that's an amazing accomplishment for him and for us to say that he's helping get these officers out in the field.
Well, and to know that he wants to do that because, I think definitely. Some people don't really want to be in a role like that, so that's great. So what, Deneen and Carla, like what changes have you seen? Well, first of all, were you with your husbands when they first got into this line of work? And what changes, if any, did you see him go through in the time that, you've seen him in this
Well,
field?
When we married, he had already been in with the department in another city for over 10 years, and then had been with the county for about 2.5 years. And so I didn't know him any other way. From the time I met him, he was already a paramedic firefighter and has been all these years. So I didn't have a comparison.
Okay. But even still in that time that you have been with him, have you seen changes in him?
Well, for years, I think it just built and built. His anger built and built, and he hadn't found a way to handle it or deal with it well. And it got to the point where we discussed divorce, and very likely would have happened. And I had asked him to go to counseling. He went once and refused to ever go again. And then I don't know what changed his mind. His dad passed away, and I do think that had a little bit of a factor, because it really had him. I think he started realizing I'm not going to live forever, And he decided, he told me, let's go to counseling. I want to go to counseling. Let's try one last time. And we did, and it's been the best thing. Like I said before, if it hadn't been for counseling, I don't think we would have made it.
That's great. Carla, what about you?
So when I met my husband, he had 8 years left in fire service. So he had actually served about 22 years prior to me meeting him, 10 as a volunteer, and then the rest of the time as a career firefighter. So I met him, like I said, when he had about 8 years left. And so as far as seeing a change in him, I would say when he retired, it was interesting because I think sometimes when they're actively in the fire service, yes, they deal with very difficult calls, but I think they just keep moving, and I think a lot of times they just shove that stuff back because they have to be focused for the next time they're on shift and the next calls. So I think, honestly, it wasn't until he retired that I really started to see more of the anxiety and, I don't know what the right word is. I guess some of those issues bubbling up because now he had stopped. He wasn't focused on going to work the next time. And I think he had to slow down and actually deal with some of the horrific calls that he had seen.
Right. And that's an interesting thing. I get a lot of people who come in when they're getting ready to retire, I would say anywhere like about 6 months prior to, and issues and calls and feelings and thoughts it does seem like they start to come to the surface, because I think, the psyche is an interesting thing, and I think the mind knows when a person's getting ready to retire, and it's not uncommon from what I've seen where that stuff will start to surface. So that's kind of interesting,
Definitely.
What about stress? So one of the questions I have is, how has the trauma or stress issues for your husband affected you? So anywhere from, the stress of the schedule, anything as benign as that, to really severe calls. Like, how does that end up affecting you guys as wives?
Well, in my situation, being a police officer wife, my husband was involved in an officer-involved shooting, and I had recently had a baby within a few months, and it put me into postpartum depression. And it was a weird thing for me because I couldn't go there with him. I didn't see what happened. I didn't know what was happening. All I knew was he was involved. And, at that moment, because of their protocols, I don't get to talk to him. I don't get to, no one notifies me of what's going on. So you just kind of got to sit by the phone and wait. And that's all you could do. So, of course, being a woman and being at home with a newborn baby, not knowing what's going on, it kind of put me in a state of panic and anxiety. So I ended up getting help for that and went to counseling a few times. And, I had to do like a walkthrough of the incident and like visually seeing that he was in no danger because I couldn't understand that.
Right.
I always assumed, when a police officer fires, it's because he's protecting his own life. But in this case, he was saving another woman's life. So going through the process of that helped me a lot. And I think it happened very early on in his career, and I think that it's helped me in similar situations that happen later on deal with it a lot better.
That's great. It kind of set the pace for you to, I guess, in the future know how to deal with that kind of situation better. Not that he's been involved in a shooting again, but just kind of maybe having more clarity and understanding. Oh,
definitely. My husband was transported to the hospital after that, years after that, but for breaking his hand in a fight situation. And, he's calling me and letting me know that, he's going to the hospital, he's okay. And because I had already, dealt with it in the first instance, it was easier for me to just say, okay, I'll meet you there, no problem. And it wasn't a high stress for me environment because I knew what to expect and I knew he was all right.
That one was probably, I can't imagine what you went through the first time when he was involved in an officer shooting and you couldn't talk to him for hours. That must have just been really, 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 really difficult.
It was extremely difficult. It was, in a state of panic and being very helpless, not being able to, because I love him very much, and not being able to go with him. And even just to sit next to him and make sure that he's okay. It's a very weird feeling. It's a very foreign feeling to not be able to help the person that you love.
Right. I think as women, we're nurturers, right, by nature.
Yes.
And so when you can't do that, and then it's your husband, that must have been really difficult. What about with your...
Immediately...
Go ahead, immediately.
Oh, immediately your mind starts to think the worst before it starts to think the best. So you're almost like your worst enemy.
How do you guys explain those kinds of things to your kids? So like how much talking do you do, I guess, especially earlier on, as your children are born and grow up, and, how do you explain their father's career to them in terms of danger and risk and safety and all of that?
Well, myself, I know that I try to, explain it at a 3 or 4-year-old level and just kind of expose them to the good side and not so much the bad side. We did have an officer shot and killed here, and, I taught them that, things like this can happen. It's very rare, but, we just have to, think of all the good things that they do, and that's 90% of the job is the good things. And not really let them watch the news or kind of, not elaborating it on them.
Right. Well, the news is not the best gauge anyways, right, of what really goes on because, they just show all the bad stuff.
Yeah, the first 10 minutes is all bad.
I know. Deneen, do you have anything to add, like in terms of how your kids have dealt with, the safety and risk factors for your husband?
Yeah. Well, like I said, everything was new for me, when we had kids, and because I wasn't exposed to this kind of career before. And I just took it as what it was. And if they asked questions, I explained, and they really seemed to deal with that. They just knew there were times when Dad couldn't come home, and it was very much like me raising the kids by myself. So they never seemed to struggle too much, because I have to honestly say, I think it would be even worse to be a wife of a police officer, because they deal with danger, and guns every single call almost, whereas firefighters, usually the danger is gone, as a paramedic at least, but then the firefighting, my husband was very careful when he was a firefighter. He's very intelligent, and I just trusted him that he knew, how much he could do, and he never had any really, really close calls that he told me about. Like I said, he didn't communicate with me a lot. So I'm sure I would have been a lot more afraid if I had known. But we just dealt with it day to day,
Right. You might not know everything. Because
exactly.
I think
and I'm sure there's a lot I don't know.
yeah, I think that, what I've heard a lot is out of wanting to protect you guys, I've heard that a
Right.
lot from people. You're like, yeah, I'm just going to leave that part out of telling her
Yeah,
about
he
how
tells
my
me
shift
now.
went. Yeah.
Right. Now he tells me. He tells me things that have happened that I didn't know at the time. And so if I had known then, I'm sure it would have been much harder to have handled it, especially with the kids.
Yeah. Yeah, I can imagine. Well, and that is a lead up into one of the questions I have is how much talking. So even now, have your husbands talked to you about traumatic calls, and if they have, how has that affected you?
For me, it helps me understand him more. I'm much more sympathetic than I was in the early years because I didn't know. I didn't know what to be afraid of. I didn't know everything. And he's much more open with me now, and I feel for him. Just like I believe it was Sarah said, she couldn't be a police officer. I couldn't be a police officer or a paramedic firefighter. I mean, that is a very stressful job, and I think my husband was called to do that also.
Right.
For me, it was more hearing, the effects of the little things that he saw that would really affect him. Children, we have a 7 and a 4-year-old, and he's been a police officer for 9 years. So when our kids were first born, if he was on a call and the house was a mess, the children weren't taken care of, the mom was drunk, nobody taking care of this little kid, it really hurt his heart. And those kind of things he would talk to me about, and, having young children that are possibly the same age as the one that he would see, those are the really hard ones to deal with as a police officer. He's expressed, there's really nothing for them to do other than, put it in someone else's hands to handle it and, hope that it gets handled correctly. Car accidents, I'm sure, and EMS wives can talk about that. Having to see a child die on the street because they weren't properly put into their car seat.
Right.
Little things like that really sit with him. And it does affect him. It doesn't stay with him to a fact where it just changes his personality. But I couldn't imagine seeing that possibly every day, once a week, anything.
Yeah, that would be so hard. But I know that children, and understandably so, right, are always the sore spot for first responders. I think if you were to say, what is the type of call that just across the board bothers everybody, it's anything having to do with a child who's been hurt. For sure.
I know my husband said that. He definitely feels that way.
Right. Carla, what about you? Has your husband talked to you about traumatic calls?
A little bit, and same thing. I mean, what he's told me is the calls with children are the most traumatic. I think since he's retired, he's a little more open, but I think he still doesn't quite share. I mean, he doesn't go into details, but he's touched upon calls here and there, and they generally are the ones that are the calls with the kids. So I don't know if that answers the question, but yes and no.
Yeah, well, and not that they have to, I think that's something that just varies. I think sometimes when they go home at the end of their cycle or shift, they don't want to talk about anything. Maybe that's part of, Sarah, like you were saying, maybe that's part of just leaving work at work, and not wanting it to kind of leak over into the home life.
Definitely, and I can totally agree with the fact that, if they're doing this job for 10 to 12 hours a day, and then they come home and, I'm sure not everyone wants to talk about their day no matter what job that they have.
Right.
They want to break from it. And, as a police officer, I'm sure he deals with the same type of calls, the same type of people every single day, and I'm sure it becomes redundant to him. And, I can tell in his personality if he needs to talk, then, I just follow his cues and ask him, or he opens up and shares. But for the most part, I have to understand as a wife that, I'm sure he doesn't want to talk about, the drunk person that ran into another guy and killed him on the road 5 times a week.
Right. Well, and aside from the trauma, they deal with people. I mean, they just deal with people, which, people they're drunk or just acting crazy, and that's a whole other thing that I know is just bothersome and annoying. I've heard many stories about just the same drunks over and over, and the same people who overdose, and I know that that's something that really gets to them too, just in terms of being frustrating and annoying.
Yeah. Well, I know from my husband's point of view is I used to love to go on ride-alongs, kind of watch what's going on and see firsthand what he has to go through. And for a while, he would arrest someone and they would be in the back seat and just calling him every name in the book. And, obviously this guy did something horrible and he's going to go to jail and he doesn't like it. But, the verbal abuse that he has to just listen to, and he's just typing away on his computer, ignoring it, and it doesn't even affect him, and it amazed me.
Wow, no kidding.
Because, I couldn't do that.
That would be hard.
And that happens probably 4 or 5 times every shift, and it's just something that they just have to deal with.
Yeah, I know. This gal that does meditation classes for us, she's a crime, she does something with crime investigation, I don't know, but anyways, she works at City Hall, and I never thought of this, but she said that a lot of times when she goes to work, people are protesting, and I was like, wow, I just never even thought of that, but that must be difficult. Just I think the attitude toward police officers in society these days is just, really makes it even more difficult. And man, they must have a really thick skin, to not give in to that. And then yet I think some do, and then there's a problem. Either because they develop anger, it just gets to be too much, sometimes for some people. Sarah, I wanted you had mentioned, like, in the academy, some of the statistics they gave you, and I wanted just for you to share those statistics, like on divorce and things like that, with our listeners, because that's interesting.
Yeah, well, first let me share that me and my husband had literally got married in February. He started the academy in April of the same year, so we were freshly newlyweds, and at the end of the academy, or towards the end, they have a family night, and a married couple who are both police officers came in to talk to us as spouses or significant others, and let us know, what to expect from the job, and he might get held over and things like that. And then they also said, try really hard, because statistically wise, if 2 cops are married to each other, it's about a 90% divorce rate.
Jeez.
If it's a police officer with a civilian like myself, it's about a 75% divorce rate.
Wow.
And they just said, just to throw those numbers out there, but to always try hard and ask for help if you need it. And, thankfully, my husband and I have never, ever, considered that. But I know that a lot of people that I've met over the years have ended in divorce. So it definitely scared me in the beginning.
Right. Well, I don't think there's any denying it that the stress factor is a lot more for police, fire, and EMS personnel than somebody who does another kind of job. And so, with that comes things like substance abuse and anger issues, and even sleepwalking. I've actually had a couple of people come in who sleepwalk because of the stress that kind of then infiltrates their sleep time. And so, I think it's unavoidable in terms of that happening. And sometimes that plays out in the marriage and in the family life.
Well, I think also for police wives, we have to be very selfless when we are married to a police officer. And if you're not, then it just does not work. You have to be very independent, very selfless, and you have to be very empathetic and think, well, he worked a 10-hour shift, got held over 4 hours, had to go to court for 2 hours. He's going to be exhausted when he comes home. I probably have to take the kids to baseball. Little things like that. If as a wife you're being selfish and you're thinking of, my husband should work a 9 to 5, then you're going to need help.
Right. Yeah, I think that just goes back to what we had said about, you guys really needing to be independent and I think all of you are. It just won't work otherwise. In closing, what would you want, a new wife to know? What do you think? What information, or even a wife that's already been with someone, a first responder for years? What do you think would be a closing statement or thing you would want to share? Carla, I'll start with you.
I guess the big thing I would stress is communication and patience. I think somebody said it before that, and I mean a two-way communication. They need to tell you, and not always in detail, but they should tell you what they're feeling, or, hey, I had a bad call, because it's those type of things that help you understand them better and be more empathetic to them. But I think it's also important for you to communicate as well and be flexible and adaptable. So I guess my point is it's definitely not easy being married to a first responder, but what they do, I could never in a million years do, and I respect their jobs, but it really boils down to having that open communications and patience with each other to work through whatever the issues are, because they're only human and they will be impacted by what they deal with on a regular basis.
Deneen, how about you?
I agree with Carla. I also think what's very important is to not be afraid to ask for help, because if we hadn't, we would have divorced. And my husband's gone through counseling. I've gone through counseling with him. The kids have gone. And now I can say I have a wonderful new husband. He is totally different. He's made an active change, and it took him going to counseling and us as a family to help him. And I couldn't praise him more now, but I was pretty angry with him before.
That's awesome. And Sarah, what would you want to say just in closing?
I think that Carla said it very well, but I also want to add very understanding. You need to be an understanding person, and you just need to be okay with the fact that you're alone at the moment, if that's the situation, because he's out there helping someone. You're the spouse, you're the rock, you're holding it together so that he can go out and help other people. And that's an amazing role as a spouse. We're doing our part just like they're doing theirs.
Right. And you guys do have a very important part, I think, is the message I wanted to convey today to the public, is you guys have a very, very important part that you play in supporting your husbands and, so that they can go out and comfortably do their job with peace of mind.
Mary, I would just like to echo what Jean said, which is help. You should not be afraid to seek help either. There's professionals like you out there that are there to help. couples and get through difficult situations. So I 100% agree with that comment as well.
Great. Well, thank you, ladies, for coming. And if you have any comments later you'd like to add, I do have a Facebook page called, I have two Facebook pages. I have Remotely Unique, and then I have Behind the Badge. I will be, the archive can be found on any of my websites. Remotely-unique.com is one of them. And then also on Facebook, and like I mentioned earlier, on iTunes under the podcast section. Thank you all for your time, and you guys have a wonderful day.
Thank you,
Mary.
You're listening to Remotely Unique with Mary Baca, only on LA Talk Radio.